Welcome to Madang Podcast. Today's special guest is Dr. Ilia Delio, who is a Franciscan Sister of Washington, D.C., and the Josephine C. Connelly Endowed Chair in Theology at Villanova University. Today she is here to talk about her newest book, The Not Yet God: Creation, Evolution, Word for God, Pantheism, and so much more. Please stay tuned. With deep roots in the Christian tradition and open to engaging dialogue, William B. Erdman's publishing company is committed to the life of the religious academy, to the church, and to the role of religion and culture. With a history spanning over 100 years, Erdman publishes the finest literature in theology, biblical studies, and religious history, and popular titles in spirituality, ministry, and cultural criticism. In addition to David Gushee, authors publishing with Erdman's include Padraig Otama, Amy Peeler, Matthew Bates, David Hummel, Janet Kellogg-Ray, and more. Popular themes throughout the 2024 book season include titles on evangelicalism and politics, faith deconstruction, and a supply of captivating literary nonfiction selections. Visit the all-new www.erdmans.com to order your books today. While you're there on the website, remember to sign up for our monthly newsletter called The Logo to stay in the know regarding upcoming releases, author events, and all things Erdman's. Homebrew Christianity's Theology Beer Camp pre-sale tickets just opened up. It is held October 17 to 19 in Denver with fabulous speakers such as Diana Butler-Bass, Brian McLaren, and Ilia Delio, and so many more. Please go to www.theologybeer.camp to register today before prices go up. Homebrew Christianity's God After Deconstruction's 10 30-minute videos looking at the top reasons people report for deconstructing their faith are now all available. In spring, there will be some live streams where both Tom and Tripp answer questions about God after deconstruction. It is an easy resource for people to be used by themselves or in small groups. Go to www.godafterdeconstruction.com. This episode of Madang Podcast is sponsored by Orbis Books, Maryknoll, New York, a world of books that matter. Orbis Books is offering 30% off the list price of Sister Ilia's most recent book, The Not Yet God, when you purchase on orbisbooks.com using promotion code MAD, that is M-A-D. Please go to www.orbisbooks.com to order your book today.
For sponsorship inquiries, please email madangpodcast@gmail.com. This is Madang, an outdoor living room for guests to share their experiences and their work. I invite you to come in and stay for a while.
Welcome to Madang Podcast. Today's special guest is Dr. Ilia Delio. She's a Franciscan Sister of Washington, D.C., an American theologian specializing in the area of science and religion, with interests in evolution, physics, and neuroscience, and the import of these for theology. She currently holds the Josephine C. Connelly Endowed Chair in Theology at Villanova University and is the author of 20 books, including Care for Creation, which won 2 Catholic Press Book Awards in 2009. Ilia holds 2 honorary doctorates, one from St. Francis University in 2015 and one from Sacred Heart University in 2020. Today, she is here to talk about her newest book, The Not Yet God. Shirley D. Kling says, if you're seeking faith in the future or a unitive vision that will revitalize our understanding of the participatory interbecoming of God, humans, and world, this book is a must read. So Ilia, thank you so much for coming on Madang. I know you're like super busy.
Thanks so much, Grace. It's great to be with you. just happy to share some ideas and insights.
Well, thank you so much. I got to meet you in person last year at the Southern Lights Conference. Yeah,
Yes.
you were so amazing. I wish I could just put that lecture just into my podcast because you
It
blew
was
me
a lot of
away.
fun.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah?
your talk just
Oh,
blew me away.
oh, gosh, I have no idea, I just do what
Yeah.
I do.
Oh, it
Yeah,
was
just bringing
amazing.
oh, I'm glad to hear. Yeah, I just want us to be, just kind of wake up to the universe we actually live in, which is really an amazing place.
Yeah.
Life is amazing, really.
Um,
It's truly wondrous.
yeah, it really is. And you bring that into all your work. And before we get into your book, the Not Yet God, I love the cover and I love the title. Tell us about you started the Center for Christogenesis. So I find it
Yeah,
very interesting. So if you could tell our listeners what it is about and how you started it and what it continues to do.
sure. Yeah, thanks, Grace. Well, I was originally trained as a scientist, so I've always had a love of science, and then I was asked to study theology by my religious community, and I thought, wow, that sounds really boring, but we'll give it a try. So I came to love theology as well, and my first teaching job was in science and religion. And then I wrote my area actually of theology was medieval. So I wrote my dissertation on Bonaventure, a Franciscan theologian. And he had a very dynamic understanding of Christ as the heart of creation, as the center of creation. And in my dissertation, I used a little bit of the Christ mysticism of the Jesuit scholar Teilhard de Chardin. And I was really intrigued by Teilhard because he himself, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, was a Jesuit. He was a scientist. He was a paleontologist. He was a very good scientist. That was his day job, actually. But he knew something else was going on, as he began to study the origins of the human person, human evolution. And he said, there's something here that just eludes scientific materialism. And he began to put together, his Christian faith, like faith in a God who becomes incarnate, like and fleshed, and this kind of enfleshed God in this energy of love, being the Christ, being formed in evolution. He put these ideas together and he said, evolution's not just a random happening, like, and by the way, evolution is truly our narrative. It's not a theory. It's not like maybe we don't come by from evolution. It just is what science tells us, and all of our science is based on it. So we come by from evolution. Evolution always begins small and keeps growing. And Teilhard saw that kind of growth as a parallel to what he called maybe the body of Christ in evolution. Like something's going on here, basically, something that's more than just like rocks coming together or, little blood cells coming together. There's something that's more than, what meets the eye. And so this notion of Christogenesis is, we might say, the love of God incarnate, materialized, enfolded in the stuff of life and becoming more conscious, more life, more personalized. And that's what we mean by Christ, the birthing of Christ, the genesis of the Christ is what Teilhard called Christogenesis. So it means that this universe that we live in is not blind and random. It has purpose, it has aim. We're going somewhere. That's what we believe. I mean, Christians believe that too, but not always sure where we think we're going. So that's might be a little different there. Uh,
We all know
yeah,
the story, right?
so we don't want to leave the world. We want to embrace it because it is what's being formed, and God is part and parcel of it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. When you were talking about evolution, I grew up in a very conservative Christian household. It was ultra,
Mm,
and
ultra concerned.
yeah,
Wow.
ultra.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if there's another word to, to say it, but it was the belief, creation in whatever, 6 physical days,
I
and the Earth,
yeah,
yeah, is only 6,000 something years old. So
the
evolution was always like an evil word. So what do you say for things
mhm.
like that? Because, many of us have gone beyond that, but I know so many who are still stuck there.
Yeah.
And,
Oh, no.
students I talk to are stuck there too. So what do you say to people?
Uh, wow, welcome to the universe, like glad you could arrive. Um, no, honestly, Grace, I grew up to very traditional Catholicism, and we were told that we humans have souls, that immortal souls created, directly by God. And we were not descendants from monkeys. Evolution is not true for the human. It might be for animals, but not for us. And we kind of bought into this stuff. And I always wondered, like, what does that mean? Like, so how did we get here? I mean, are we just like from the stork or what? Where God was like a magician and just abracadabra pulled us out of like thin air? I mean, it kind of doesn't make sense. And it's kind of a shame because God gave us minds to know. Like, isn't that really wonderful that we can study? We can actually discover how life forms. That's pretty remarkable. So I don't want to make God into something God is not. And that's like a magician, kind of a Zeus figure. And nor do I think that we're all that special, quite honestly. We might have immortal souls, but we're kind of a wreck to creation, to the rest of ecology.
Yeah, that's
So
very
we
true.
we've got to get out of this. We're really special people. We are right now, we're the highest, most complex, self thinking type of species that we are. So it's okay to say we're a species. God is perfectly okay with that. God's like, yeah, that's what you are. You're a species. So we're a wise species, right? A Homo sapiens sapien species. So I try to tell evolution like a story. I think the science does scare us. Darwin definitely scares a lot of religious people. It looked like he ditched religion. Like, who needs religion now when we have science, which is always the big thing? Like, now we can really do it ourselves. It's like Jello, just add water and just add your microscope. But now we realize, wow, this is more like, a waking up story. Like, the universe kind of wakes up about 13.8 billion years ago. And then here on Earth, we started getting out of bed around 4.2 billion years ago. So that's an extremely, I think we really need to appreciate how the long expanse of life,
Mhm.
that's what's so like this is a God who has all the time in the world, really, just like infinite patience, infinite time. Like, forget about time, as far as God's concerned, is like whatever, take as long as you want. Take 4.2 billion years, to form. And so what's so remarkable is that at this long spans of time, and then, stars formed, planets formed, even our own Earth. I mean, how did we get here? It's pretty remarkable, might have been like an asteroid collision, some kind of rock debris in a cosmic collision. But here we are out of the smallest of elements. And that's what's so beautiful about life. It's the simplicity of elements that gives rise to the complexity of life. And that's just, it's just remarkable. So I like to think of God as a tremendous artist. This is a God who really, not like a planner. I mean, we're not like a Ouija board, and God's like, let's see what we can do here. I think God just the power of love, And I just think, yeah, we have made God way too much like an engineer, like a Legos constructor. But God is nothing. Like, that's just so that makes God one big one of us. And now that is what God is at all. I think Teilhard put it like kind of like this way. God is love. Period. That's what John tells us. God is love. So that's what God is, love. And love always is unitive. Love always pulls together, and in pulling together, it creates something new. People get married, they have children, they raise families, and that's what God is. God is ever newness and love,
Mm.
pulling together, uniting, drawing us onward to new life. And God is always that future fullness of life. as that absolute wholeness and love. And so our job is to stop making God into like a big one of us and then figuring that God planned it this way, but the plans got messed up. Like here we are, because love is the heart of the universe. And that's what Teilhard said. He said the physical structure of the universe is love. Like no matter what you might try to do, you will not get rid of love, like this core energy of unitive life. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I can listen to you all day talking about God. That's so exciting for me. Watching you on stage at that Southern Lights conference, same feeling I'm getting across the screen. So thank you for sharing that. In your Center for Christogenesis, you also have a podcast called Hunger for Wholeness. Did you want to say anything
Yes.
about that?
Yeah, thanks, Grace. Yeah, we started this Hunger for Wholeness podcast because, coming from the Catholic tradition, the word Catholic or Catholicity originally meant having a consciousness of the whole or a wholeness. Like it was actually coined by the Greeks, who were not Catholic or followed the Pope or anything. They just had a sense of this great expansive wholeness, being one with the stars and the movement of the heavens. And so I think in our own time, for a whole host of reasons, we've lost our center of wholeness. We've lost sort of the axial point within us, and we're desperately seeking for wholeness. I mean, whole foods, holistic health, right? Everything's wholeness.
Yeah, it is.
We're like this craze because we want to be whole. We feel like we're fragmented. We feel like we're little fragments in search of that wholeness or unified self. And so our podcast really is really kind of centered around thinkers and writers who help us in their own works to come to deeper insights on wholeness. So we were grateful to have you on our podcast. We've had different scientists. We've had Rupert Sheldrake. We had Richard Rohr. Just a number of really interesting people.
Yeah, I
And
was really honored to be on your podcast.
oh, super. Yeah, it was great to have you. And, we're really interested to hear how people, not just Westerners, but, everyone on this planet searching for wholeness. You don't have to be North America. We're frenetic about it. But I think there are other cultures, that are better at, this kind of holistic life. And I wish we would pay more attention to them and thinking that the West has all the answers to everything. We know that is not true. So, we're trying to diversify. We had a Hindu, a Swami, I forget his last name because it's very long. So, but Swami was super, Hindu perspective, really interested in Buddhist perspectives, really interested in Asian perspectives, really interested in African perspectives. Ubuntu is such an incredibly rich concept for African culture. It just kills me that we have not paid any attention to it. What is wrong with us? Anyway, so that's what our Hunger for Wholeness podcast does. Try to like, hello, there are other wonderful people there around the world seeking, not only have they seeking wholeness, but they actually are finding it in their own cultures. So
Yeah.
much
So
to
thank
learn.
you. Yeah, thank you that, you have the Center for Christogenesis and you have the podcast there, Hunger for Wholeness. You're so busy speaking and writing everywhere. So I'm so grateful that you're here on Madang Podcast today. So my first question about the book, because I just find it really fascinating. And I don't really ask people this question, but I wanted to ask you how or how did you start writing this book? What was the
Mhm.
moment that you thought you're gonna write a book? Because for me, I don't get a spark like that, but it felt like maybe you did. So I just wanted to ask
Yeah.
you.
Well, I am deeply interested in the question of God. And I just read too many things like we actually know what God is. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. Not at all. So I want to step back from thinking that we have all the answers to God to the question of what is God. And I was influenced actually by my colleague John Haught's book, God After Einstein. And I think Jack Hott did a fabulous job of showing how by changing our understanding of space and time, which we don't factor into usually in our theologies, but
Yeah.
space and time, are being influential in coming to a new understanding of God because matter itself, is something that's coming into existence all the time. And so the way, Einstein's theory of general relativity, the way quantum physics have really given us a radically new understanding of the basic stuff of life, like not just humans, I mean space, time, matter itself. The whole thing is so radically changed. I can't imagine that we would not think our theology. I really worry that we're doing theology sometimes based on old concepts of space and time and just old cosmologies, old philosophies, just a lot of old dead people, that really they did very well when they were alive, but we've just moved to a whole different level of understanding things, and that must include God as well.
We're so funny because you're always dead right on about, you know,
Right?
it's
Yeah,
like, and we gotta stop
like
reading the white old men. That's what we gotta stop
exactly.
doing.
Yeah, I didn't throw that one in, but that is true. That not only are they
Well, I
dead, but
throw it in all
old
the
white.
time. Yeah. But I think you are so right. I always joke about we gotta stop reading about the dead white men, but I think, you're right on about the old ways of thinking because that we still continue to do, and you address it, in your book. It's quite
Yeah.
interesting that you have a warning in the book, and it says, "This book may be hazardous to the stability of your soul. It
I
might
thought it was
cause undue anxiety or outburst of emotion." Did you put it in, or did the editor tell you to put it in?
I did. It was like a smoking label, like if you read this, you can be sure to be disturbed. This is not meant to make you happy and, pacify you and think that, God is a bunch of daisies and flowers and life is a rainbow. I want people to wake up a little bit. I want us to be disturbed. We should be disturbed. I mean, look at our world. Seriously. How can we just like say, "Oh yeah, I believe in God, God's in control." All right. Well, you might want to think that again, because it's not looking too good out there. I'm teaching a course on ecology right now, and
Oh,
the numbers are just, it's scary for young people. It's scary for old people too, but if
right.
you're younger, just means you have that much, more years ahead of you. So, we know the global warming issue, but then we have all sorts of we can't even get along with one another anymore. We can't have a civil conversation anymore if you have two different views on things. God forbid, I mean, it's an all I won't use the word of violence, but it's major conflict. So I want to say, how can we possibly, keep going on and on, saying the Nicene Creed or whatever creed we say and say, I believe in God and have a world like this? There's something deeply off. And I think it's in us. I think we're the problem. So basically, God's
Well,
not the problem, by the way. Yeah.
yeah. I'm glad you put the warning. I never have a warning, but one of my forthcoming books, the publisher told me to put a little warning on a certain chapter. But so I thought maybe Orbis Books told you to put the warning.
It is pretty funny. I put it right up front, just like your smoking label, right? If you
That's
plan to
right.
do this, just
So
know
that's
that,
good.
your health will be changed. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not light reading. You can't just say, "Oh, I'm gonna sit here and just finish the book." It's like densely packed. So I'm glad you put the warning there. In the book, you also talk about we are in a major God shift. The old
Yes.
God, you kind of mentioned it of the starry heavens, the sky God has been falling since the early 20th century. And,
Yes.
you're teaching that ecology course. I'm teaching an ecotheology course right now, too. So, um, like, what is this major God shift?
Yeah. Honestly, Grace, I actually think the major God shift,
Mhm.
if I go back to Christianity, I honestly wonder if we just messed it up pretty early on, like around 325 AD, with Constantine the politicization of religion and power struggles and patriarchy. But like, so Jesus comes along, right? He's Jewish. And but they're like, well, wait a minute, there's something going on in this guy that's like seems like what we read about in the Old Testament, but he seems to be living it out. So, I mean, right then and there, we have to say something took a turn. If you want to talk about mutations, like, we talk about genetic mutations. Well, this was like a religious mutation. This was like something, this was a God mutation. And it was like the monotheism of Judaism was just kind of turning here. Like Jesus is like the reign of God is now. And people are like, wait, what now? Really? Aren't we just, waiting for that? And then aren't you, you are the Christ. You're the what really? Really? Oh, seriously, what did you have for breakfast here? I mean, so it was so radical. This is what I think. So that's number one, the radicality of Christianity. Second is like, well, get rid of the temple. Don't hold on to it. Like, we're going to rebuild that in 3 days. And they're like, this guy's really out of his mind. So Christianity is basically, you really have to be out of your mind to be following this. But then he's also saying, like, rebuild it. And that's where I do think Christianity is really about the godness of the human person. And, where's the new temple? It's the human person, right? The temple of the Holy Spirit. Like, where does that spirit dwell? Not in a gold, tabernacle, all nice 14 karat gold. It's in the human person. Wow. So I think the whole thing at church got really kind of sidetracked too. And then it's like Athanasius said, well, God became human so that humans could become God. And it was like, what? We're going to become God? No, I don't think so. That's not possible, right? Because that's where we get all Greek philosophy saying, no, God is like, divine substance, divine essence. No way you're going to touch God, nor way does God really get in touch with us, some kind of mediator thing going on here. So that's where Carl Jung says, wait a minute, this is wrong. I mean, this process of religion is actually natural to what we're about. Like, and that's where I think the revolution is. I think Christianity ushered in proleptically, in anticipation of Carl Jung, like become fully human and you will become like God. And it's like, what more could you want? And that's, I think, what the mystery of Christ is about, and nothing more. Like, we've made it into elaborate stories that have just been really good for movies, but not so good for the rest of the earth. So that's basically what I'm saying is that our cosmology has radically shifted. Our philosophy really must shift accordingly, and therefore so too must our metaphysics. And so God is like maybe like nothing like we've thought about in the past. And maybe we just have to rethink God entirely. Certainly, even in light of your own work. I mean, the patriarchy has all but killed us, and we still have it. We can't get out of it. It's
Yeah.
so kind of sad. And yet I think Jesus was the deep patriarchalizing of monotheism. And he was more mother and sister and brother and than anything else. So yeah,
Mm.
that's what I'm trying to say is we're not at the end of Christianity. It's just being born. And I think 20th century science is helping us to awaken to a whole revitalization of the radicality and the revolutionary dimensions of this Christian um, religion.
Wow, that's all amazing. And then that actually leads into the second one. I love this sentence that you have. You said, a woman theologian espousing a new theology is bound to be suspect. And I couldn't agree with you more. Right there, I was like, yep, because you and I, women theologians, you in Catholicism, me in Protestantism, but still the patriarchy is there. And then you're right, yet God speaks in many and various ways. And today, God is speaking loudly through women. So please pay attention. Yeah. So can you say a bit more? Because I could not agree with you more than that. I just like, we have
Yeah,
pushed women aside for the last 2,000 years, and we can't keep silent anymore.
totally, Grace. I mean, look, we're still living with Aristotle, we're just, as far as the culture, patriarchal culture, we're incomplete images of the image of God with incomplete intellects. Now, there are a lot of women who have done amazing things, written amazing books, and, shown themselves to be very, very smart people. And I think we are making progress slowly but surely. I think certainly the younger generations are much more attuned to this. But there is still, by and large, certainly within our institutions, the hanger, that kind of dome of patriarchy. And, on an official level, I do think I think the Catholic Church, for example, it's like, wow, we invited women to the synod. It's like, whoa, that is really super, Not that we're going to listen to anything really of substance that they have to say, but at least they're sitting in the same chairs next to us. Honestly, really, we're in an age where artificial intelligence is actually remaking our species, where gendering is just become so now, it's like, yes. And in terms of religion, it still has this male aura, like, it's got to be sharply intellectual, logically consistent. It coheres with the tradition. Can a woman really adequately, articulate such a theology? And my answer is get a life, or, or take a break. Seriously. I just I've never bought into the patriarchy thing. The more I actually woke up to it for years. I mean, I lived in the male church and, I was kind of brain dead to it. It was just the way life was. I came from an Italian American family. It's like, yes, father knows best. I'm like, no, he doesn't. And the guy is like, yeah, he definitely can't preach a thing, so, the fact that like women are even this term equal, seriously, we have to actually use that word, that we're equal. No, I don't think so. I think we are all part of humanity. End of story. And we're part and parcel of what we're becoming together. I don't think we have to parse ourselves out and just kind of prove ourselves, that we actually have a brain with two hemispheres that might function at the same time. so so I just find that the male thing is still pretty dominant in Catholic circles, a little bit in the academy, and I have no time for it, honestly. I mean, I used to get upset by it. Now I just roll my eyes and just yawn and just wonder,
Oh,
like, how long are they going to keep speaking and when will they stop? Yeah. Like, you
I
have no
I
idea
have
what you're talking about. Like, yeah, no, you really don't have an idea what you're talking about.
I need to do what you're doing because sometimes I take it too personally. Because
Oh,
people
no.
will say stuff like that to me, and it bothers me, but, but I gotta learn to roll my eyes like you and then just brush it off.
You do. My mother used to have a saying. She was from Sicily, and she was like the woman of pithy sayings. One was, little people act big and big people act little, and a lot of maleness is a lot of low ego, it's a lot of like, I've got to blow myself up to make people realize that I really am intelligent. And it's like, you don't have to do that. Like, I have always found the best scholars, male or female, say very little about themselves. They just have wonderful ideas. They're willing to share those ideas. They're very humble. They're 2 feet on the ground people, and they really want to advance knowledge. End of story. And they're
Mhm.
happy to be working at this together. Like, I found a lot of people with very fragile egos, the need to show that they're intelligent, like, like quoting things in Latin or French, or simultaneously Latin and French. It's like, whoa, that's super. I have no idea what you're talking about, but who cares, really? Yeah, I think this age of having to prove yourself in academia, it's got to end. This is just a waste of time. The
Well,
world is in need,
oh, yeah,
of real thought and passionate thought, by the way.
yeah. Oh, anyway, you are so funny and you are right to the point. So I'm just grateful for everything that you've written in the book and what you're saying on the podcast right now. So the book is all about God, and you write that Hebrews did not coin the word God. So if you want to say a little bit about that, because I think many in the church, that's how we feel.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, they're an ancient tribe, but I think Ramapanikar, you know, traces that word back even further to the Sanskrit language, where he says, God was the name of divinity or light, like God as what was a word for light or illumination. I thought that was really interesting because there have been recent scientific studies to show a resonance or correlation between consciousness and light.
Mm.
And therefore, I think, God is sort of, we come into that word with, you might say, the evolution of consciousness as we move from an awareness of, say, spirits in nature, from more animistic types of spiritualities towards maybe a level of consciousness that comes into a greater sense of self and otherness, and that other becomes then this emergence of a light, a new light, that's radiating now, not only within me, but I see that light, throughout creation. So I do think God is an emergent, how would I say this? Religion is an emergent phenomenon of evolution. It doesn't just appear, it doesn't drop down from the heavenly dews. It wasn't a bunch of angels who got together and, like, spray dusted religion. It's an emergent phenomenon of human evolution. And God is the name of this power of love, of wholeness, of life. It's a name that connotes the infinite horizon. Like, we can only think so far about these things, and God is the moreness of that thinking. Yeah.
If we can
So
think that way more, I think we will have less problems because we think of God as this almighty king and Lord and I don't know, emperor
male,
and all that,
male,
with
elderly, grandfather,
yeah,
Lord, you know,
yeah.
like the Godfather, you know, the
I think if
one
we
who's
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, the one who's sort of ruling over,
Yeah,
God's like a monarch, like a king. And usually, I mean, who has an elderly grandmother image for God, right? No one. It's always the elderly grandfatherly figure. I mean, or who has, that's why I remember that book. Oh, it came out a few years ago. Anyway, where he pictures God, as a mother, the Holy Spirit is a woman, and yeah, I mean, we never picture God as a woman, or never image God in any other way that um, elderly male with long white hair and white, you know,
right.
of course. What else? you know, I mean, God
Yeah.
forbid, God should
Mm,
be black or Asian or
yeah.
Korean.
Or a woman, a black woman or a Korean woman, yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So all these images have been wired into our brains, literally. I mean, medieval art,
Mhm.
Western medieval art has really wired us to think that God is really this. And if you were to anyway try to dispel it, deconstruct it, or whatever, I mean, it's the fires of hell are just waiting there for you, if you try to do anything to this image. And I'm like, it's an image, it's not a very good image either. It's like pretty bad. So I'm sure God must be like, what is wrong with these people? They're just really messed up. You know?
I was saying, listen to Ilia Delio. You gotta stop listening to all the men.
Yes. I mean, I don't want to lump all men because there's some really good men, but there's some really good women too. And there's some good trans women, and there's some really good, LGBTQ plus women and men and women men, whatever people are. Why do we have to keep labeling? Like, this is the thing with God. The more we keep labeling God as a male, we can't get out of that gendering problem. So, like, God is love, God is compassion, God is that wholeness of life. And then you can be whatever you're really called to be in relation to that God, right? Without having to fit any form.
Yeah. So earlier you went to the problem with 325. I thought you were going to go right to the beginning. Because for me, it's always like this dualism that's so problematic within Christianity. And that's why
Yeah.
it's so hard for us to get over the trans and all these LGBTQ issues and etc.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you. That's such an exciting discussion. Your book does talk a lot about creation and about Genesis, the words used in Hebrew, which I find so fascinating because it really helps us to understand. And you say that creation exists because God exists, and God
Yeah.
exists because creation exists. So I don't know if you want to say a bit more because that's all tied into this your notion of God and creation and us and evolution. I find it so
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. Thanks. Well, first of all, I do think the Old Testament, even though poor God is really portrayed as some old cranky guy who really has a lot of bad hair days, but I think the Old Testament is really beautiful in that deep relationship of God, with creation. And so, actually, my thoughts on God and creation really come out of Genesis 1. There's a unity there right from the beginning. So, even in terms of evolution, we came into this consciousness of a unified relationship between what we are, power of creativity, at the heart of this life. And the fact is we cannot conceive of God apart from creation. Which we do. We always think that God has this separate life apart from us. But I'm like, how could you possibly conceive that since you're the ones who are articulating that life? So there's something about God that is inextricable from creation. You can't separate these things. So I call it the hard problem of God. We don't know what God is like. We don't know God's inner life because the only inner life of God is the life that we construct. It's the one that we're imagining or kind of devising. So I think, where there's creation, there is a need to account for the wholeness, the unity of that creation, which the word God as a deep personal source of unity. And I do like the word God. I had this conversation recently, like, do we have, because of the gendering question, right? Do we have to keep the word God? And there's something deeply personal. We like personal names, right? If I just called you book, since you're sitting behind books, or called you shelf because you're sitting in front of a bookshelf, what does that do for us? So there's something about the name that personalizes the existence of that relatedness. And so I think that's what God does for me anyway. And what I'm saying is there's a power of a named power of life at the heart of life. And I can't get rid of, I mean, even if I don't want to believe in that name or that God or anything, but I still know that I don't hold this life together. Believe me, if you live my life, you'd know it's all over the place. So there's something here that's so bound and unified and inextricable. And that's, I think, what the Old Testament, I am with you always until, well, that's Jesus, but the Old Testament kind of gives that same testimony that, wherever you go, I shall go, and whatever you do, I am with you. And that I am with you. I think that's that power of God, that unified personal presence of love. No matter where we go, what we do, what we become, what we throw out, God is there for us and with us. And that is a wonderful, way to look at this emergent wholeness of life.
That's so beautiful. And earlier you talked about wholeness, and in the book you coined a term which I find so beautiful and helpful. And I think I'm gonna be able to use it someplace too. You coined the term theology. Am I saying it
Theology.
right?
Yes, theology.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So tell
Yeah,
us, tell the listeners what you mean by this term, and because I find it
yes.
so useful. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, I took the term holon, which is a term that has emerged with systems biology. that there are no independent parts. There are holes within holes within holes. So a holon is a part that's part of a larger whole. And therefore, I think when we talk about God in creation or God in our lives, that's what I mean. I think we can't extricate these, realities. That God is the whole, and we're part of God's wholeness, and God is part of our wholeness. We're holes within holes. And how would we develop a theology of wholeness? That's basically what it is. So that we are begin to talk. That's what I'm trying to shift our categories from kind of, getting out of a metaphysics of substance or metaphysics of essence, or God is that prime mover and we're secondary to God, and this kind of theology of participation, that God is the supreme creator and we participate. And I'm like, well, I think it's different. I think it's much more of a mutual relatedness where the wholeness of what I am is entangled with the wholeness of God, and the wholeness of God is really entangled with the wholeness of what I am and what I'm becoming, in my relatedness throughout this creation. So I would like I take theology as the starting point to rethink theology in terms of wholeness, emergence, evolution, and becoming. What are we becoming as we move through into the unfolding of complexity and consciousness, which is what evolution's about. So, yeah,
Yeah.
the
Well,
whole within the whole.
that's so helpful because I think that will really help us, because we have used God to destroy each other. We've done
Oh my
so
God.
much in the name of God to go into war and do everything destructive, this climate change that's happening. So I find that so helpful. So thank you. I really recommend your
Yeah.
book. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Grace. And the other thing is, like the many people who have ditched that kind of patriarchal warring God, that's not helpful either because we need, you know, uh, I'd like to kind of revive God. I want God to come back as a living God, life itself. Not, I think one way to think about God is life itself, the
Mm.
wholeness of life. I love that, that saying from John, I have come that you might have life and have it to the full, to
Yeah.
the full. And I think to myself, my God, we're barely holding on, what would life to the full look like? And I'm sure some will say, well, it's not meant to be here on earth, but I'm saying, well, why not? At least it can, I don't think terrestrial life is going to last for billions and billions of years in the future, but I do think we will merge with other planets of life. So, what would the fullness of life look, in this cosmic scale of life, where God is this ever entwining energy of love, in it? We think too small about God. We've shrunk God to our size. And then we set up that God in opposition to other gods. Your God's not my God's not your God, so I'm going to fight you. And then we kill ourselves. And in doing that, we destroy the earth. So, what kind of
Yeah.
religion is that? Who would want that religion anyway? That's just a mess, you ask me.
It is a mess, but some people really love that, and it boggles my
God,
mind, and it boggles your mind too, but there are people who
I
really.
think, well, I wonder, Grace, if they love it because they're deeply fearful that if they were
Oh,
to give that up,
mhm,
what would happen? And I think this is where we have to really, this is faith, right?
mhm,
It's not just faith seeking understanding. I think love, where there's faith in a God who is love, where there is love, there's no fear because you trust. And I
mhm,
think what's called today, we're called into a God of trust, a God
mhm.
of hope, a God of future, a God of life, a God who loves diversity and loves new ideas and loves imagination. I mean, we have just shrunk everything and we're killing ourselves in the meantime. So
Yeah.
wake up and get on board with a God who's really dying to live.
Okay. Well, you have, your book is so deep and there's so many concepts in there. One that I really want you to share, before we wrap up is because we're dealing with this climate change issue, this climate crisis, you deal a lot with pantheism and panentheism, and these terms, and you bring in the science, and some of it's too deep for me to comprehend because my mind is, I used to love science, but then theology told me, oh, get away from science. But you are now telling me I have to go back to science. But anyway, just tell us more about these wide concepts and terms that are so helpful for us
Yes.
in our theological journey. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, classical theism does hold an ontological distinction. In other words, God is divine being, we're created being, and there's no way we'll ever be divine being. So, that holds that kind of distinction between God and creation. And, I can understand that to some extent. We're participating in God. I get it. Panentheism wants to take that one step further and say, but God is in all things. That's an incarnational statement. And all things are in God. But I think panentheism does still hold to, in some ways, ontological distinctions. I mean, it's the in part, it's sort of like um, God is in us, we are in God, but God is not us, and we are not God. And I want to just challenge that. I want to say, okay, let's take that one step further and bring that in conversation with quantum physics, where quantum physics cannot really distinguish between the entities that are entangled with each other. And I haven't really worked this out, in a systematic way, but I do think taking quantum physics as the starting point for talking about a God world relationship puts us in a whole different field, literally, of relatedness with God, so that we cannot readily separate God and what we are. That in that sense, I want to say that God is the root or the. I don't want to use Tillich's language of ground, but I do use it to some extent. God is the ground or the root or the wave dimension of the particularity of existence. And so I want to opt for some type of pantheism. Now, I'm not just doing that on my own. Teilhard de Chardin actually wrote a chapter on pantheism and Christianity. It's in his essays on Christianity and evolution. And everybody's like, oh, no, no, no. Teilhard was a panentheist. And I'm like, oh, no, no, no. Actually, he advocated for Christian pantheism. And that's what I think we need to understand better. Christian pantheism. He does say that there are types of pantheism, like Spinoza types, that they conflate. In other words, everything's collapsed together, and so God is everything from your coffee cup to your TV screen, and there's no hope in that, honestly. If everything is God, and you look at the world, you go, really, this is really a mess. But Christian pantheism is the unitive differentiation of God and us in a union of love. And so for Teilhard, Christian pantheism really says God is not just at the heart of things. God is God is that thing. God is the leaf. God is the material stuff, and that gets us really worried. And we're saying that but God cannot be collapsed or conflated with that material stuff. And that's Teilhard's whole thing, that God actually becomes God more as that material stuff begins to unify and grow in consciousness. And so he has a whole way of working this out, that love and awareness actually begin to differentiate God and creation, but it's actually through the pantheism of material pantheism. So I will work that out better for my next book, my next round of books.
Oh, I can't wait
All
yeah, I can't wait for that one.
super. All I'm
Yeah.
saying is we do not have any sense of God at the heart of creation. Really, not. I mean, no operative sense whatsoever. I mean, recycling and I mean, you look at our amount of garbage and consumption and stuff. We have a godless, consumptive world. I mean, you got to admit it, and it's because we've been trained to think of God up there. We're down here, and creation is just useful for us. And I'm saying, this is nix so good, as the Germans would say. you know?
So before we go, I want you to say about the title of the book because you do discuss it, the not yet God. So if you can say say something about what that means,
Yeah.
not yet God.
So Right. So, actually, the title does come from John Hott's book, God
Yeah.
After Darwin, where he says the unfolding of space time, in other words, that consciousness is rising, means that God is not yet come into the fullness of all that God can be. And Teilhard actually says the same thing in his own writings. We don't start with God, we start with our experience of wholeness and this kind of material, the sense of life itself is, the dynamism of life and what's going on in that dynamic wholeness of life. And as we become aware of that dynamism, we begin to realize that, what we read in scripture is that God is this kind of even the Old Testament to the New Testament is an emergence of God. God is revealing God's self. God is slowly disclosing God's self. And that's the same thing here. God is rising up in and through conscious awareness. So God is not over, old, and done. God is becoming God and the fullness of God. And of course, that not yet God then becomes the mystery of Christ, because what God is and what we are called into become unified in that mystery of incarnation. And I think we have yet to really understand what that mystery holds for us personally as humans, and then for the whole of created earth life and then cosmic life. So the not yet God is, don't think you have all the answers to God. You have the questions and live into the questions, because God is becoming something in and through us.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Ilia Delio. It's like I can talk to you all day long, but I know you're probably going to start your other book now. So, but thank you so much. It was such a delight
Yeah.
to have you on Madang Podcast. The book is Not Yet God. I hope everyone goes out to buy it. I think people can read it in churches and, together as a study group or in seminary setting or in college. I think it's such an important book. It's really an eye opener. And today we just touched the tip of the iceberg with you. So thank you so much and taking time out of your busy schedule to be on Madame Podcast.
Thank you, Grace. I really appreciate it.
With deep roots in the Christian tradition and open to engaging dialogue, William B. Ehrman's publishing company is committed to the life of the religious academy, to the church, and to the role of religion and culture. With a history spanning over 100 years, Ehrman publishes the finest literature in theology, biblical studies, and religious history, and popular titles in spirituality, ministry, and cultural criticism. In addition to David Gushee, authors publishing with Ehrman's include Padraig Otama, Amy Peeler, Matthew Bates, David Hummel, Janet Kellogg-Ray, and more. Popular themes throughout the 2024 book season include titles on evangelicalism and politics, faith deconstruction, and a supply of captivating literary nonfiction selections. Visit the all-new www.erdmans.com to order your books today. While you're there on the website, remember to sign up for our monthly newsletter called The Logo to stay in the know regarding upcoming releases, author events, and all things Erdmans. Homebrew Christianity's Theology Beer Camp pre-sale tickets just opened up. It is held October 17 to 19 in Denver with fabulous speakers such as Diana Butler-Bass, Brian McLaren, and Ilia Delio, and so many more. Please go to www.theologybeer.camp to register today before prices go up. Homebrew Christianity's God After Deconstruction's 10 30-minute videos looking at the top reasons people report for deconstructing their faith are now all available. In spring, there will be some live streams where both Tom and Tripp answer questions about God after deconstruction. It is an easy resource for people to be used by themselves or in small groups. Go to www.godafterdeconstruction.com. This episode of Madang Podcast is sponsored by Orbis Books, Maryknoll, New York, a world of books that matter. Orbis Books is offering 30% off the list price of Sister Ilia's most recent book, The Not Yet God, when you purchase on orbisbooks.com using promotion code MAD, that is M-A-D. Please go to www.orbisbooks.com to order your book today.
For sponsorship inquiries, please email madangpodcast.gmail.com.